Giuseppe Ribaudo, also known on Instagram as Giucy Giuce, is a quilter whose love of fabric was passed down to him from his grandmother, a talented seamstress. A teacher, pattern writer, and fabric designer, Giuseppe enjoys exploring quilting and textile design through a playful use of color. When he is not quilting, he enjoys traveling, hiking, and knitting. He resides just outside of New York City in Queens, New York.
Hello, Giuseppe. I'm so glad you're here.
Me too.
Wonderful. Well, we heard about all of the awesome things you're doing. You're designing fabric, you're designing quilts, you're making these just gorgeous, incredible, and just really interesting quilts. How did you get started with all of this?
My grandmother's a seamstress, so I've been around sewing my whole life. Not quilting, but she was she's an incredible garment sewer. And so that's kind of where my interest was sparked. She taught me to sew when I was really young. Just kind of through observation, I learned what I learned. And then when I went away to college, I went to school for acting. And I sort of wanted something to fill my time in between auditions and acting gigs and things like that. And so I lived right across the street from a Hancock Fabric. And I would go in all the time. I was a knitter, so I would go in to look at, I would get knitting needles and things like that there. And I would always go past the fabric section, and I was always drawn to color and pattern and design and, tile work, things like that were always really inspiring to me. And so I would just constantly be looking at the fabric, and I always found myself looking at it even though I didn't have a purpose for it. And so, at the time at least. And so one day I was like, I'm going to try quilting. I'm going to see, what I can do with it. At the time it was kind of, I think might be surprising because this is so not like what my work looks like now, but it sort of started as improvisational.
Okay.
Just kind of sewing pieces together, and like cutting things down and adding pieces. And I didn't know what I was doing at the time. This is before I had Instagram. I don't even think I did a search on the internet about quilting. I kind of just like, one of those things where you feel like you're not inventing it for the first time, but to you, you're inventing it for the first time,
Wow.
And so I just sort of would take fabric, I would cut it up into pieces, I'd sew it back together, and I did all sorts of things wrong, the way that you're not supposed to do things. And then eventually I got more interested in it, so I started buying books about it. That's about time that I joined Instagram and found this really supportive individuals, and it just sort of grew from there. It went from being something that was barely a hobby, it was just something I would do when I felt like it, and then now it's my livelihood. It's kind of crazy how your path changes like that.
It is. I love that, and it's so interesting. So I started quilting in a very similar way. Like I didn't have. I didn't start with a class. I didn't start with a book, a step-by-step or anything like that. It's the kind of thing if I get a new gadget or something like that, I just kind of throw out. I don't even look at the instruction manual because I just want to kind of figure it out on my own. Was that kind of how you approached it too? Just kind of started playing around and just kind of seeing what happened?
Yeah, I always pretty much I like to experiment more than anything else, just because I feel like if you can really get your hands in there and just like let yourself get a little dirty and figure out stuff for yourself, I feel like then you like actually processing it when you're actually really learning the right way to do things is easier, because you've already, like I had already done, like there's so many things, like when I teach and I have a student say to me, well, why can't I just do it this way? And I'll explain to them why it doesn't work that way. I know that because I did it that way.
Exactly.
I tried out the bad way to do everything, and so now I know the good way to do it,
Totally.
So that was really, I think that you should, and I think there's two ways to approach it. I think, but in either way, you have to kind of experiment. You can either experiment up front and then learn all about it, or you can learn all about it and then throw it all away and do whatever the heck you want to do. Those are the two ways to approach. I mean, that's creative freedom. That's what being creative is really all about to me, is just, okay, I know all of this stuff, and now I'm going to take what I want to, and I'm going to throw away what I don't, and I'm going to use it the way that I want to use it, and I'm going to hopefully have fun with the process.
Learn the rules like a pro so you can break them like an artist.
Yes,
right?
100%. Exactly.
The quote. I love that.
That's a great one. Yeah.
Yeah. So how then did you get started? Because you started with like a lot of EPP is kind of, because you started kind of improv, and then did you go into English paper piecing right away after that, or?
It was a little bit of a longer road before I got to English paper piecing.
Okay.
From the kind of improv stuff that I was doing, the first book that I got was by Elizabeth Hartman.
Mm-hmm.
It was it's her patchwork kind of 101 book.
Yeah.
The title escapes me at the moment, but it's an old favorite book of mine. So from there, from the improv stuff, then I started more traditional piecing, and I didn't really go to patterns. I went more to looking up different things like flying geese and square triangles, like different motifs that were used, and then sort of put them together the way that I wanted to put them together. That's where I went to, like, from one far end of experimenting and playing to the other of like very regimented, and this is how pieces come together, and much in the way that I approach English paper piecing, with different shapes coming together. I did that sort of with the traditional piecing, where I would be like, okay, well, I want, I'll play with half square triangles in English paper piecing and squares or whatever, different shapes, and just sort of see what comes up. It wasn't until after I felt like I really understood quilting, or like patchwork, I should say, like specifically, that I wanted to kind of venture into something new and different.
Okay.
Because my zest for wanting to know as much about this industry as I possibly can is kind of never ending. Even if it's something that I don't feel like I would particularly use, I still want to know about it, because you never know if at some point down the road, you're going to want to use that skill set.
Yeah.
So that's where when I finally felt like I was like, okay, I feel like I have a handle on what patchwork is like now, and what that means, and how to use it. Like, I can read a pattern now, I can do all of those things. That's when I was like, it's time for something new. That's when I started playing with English paper piecing.
Okay, great. And then you just started kind of playing around and experimenting. How did you approach that?
With English paper piecing, it started really simple with just using hexes and sewing them together to make bigger hexes, and just experimenting like that. Then from there, I would go to paperpieces.com and I would see what shapes fit together well, like what measurements go together. And I would start to add pieces to that, to see if I could make new shapes. Then from there, that's when I started using other people's patterns to make my own, to put my spin on their patterns.
Okay.
And then from there, it was kind of at the same time I was working on other people's patterns, I was starting to design my own as well.
Gotcha.
Seeing how, because I mean, like, when I started designing them, it was kind of before English paper piecing really blew up for the modern world. It was when we were all kind of just sort of experimenting with it and learning what it was and stuff like that. And then suddenly we started to see patterns popping up more, and that's when I was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to release, my first pattern and see how it goes.
Yeah, it's funny, this traditional technique, English paper piecing, that has been around for hundreds of years, but then modern quilters discovered it, and then it became this big exciting thing for modern quilters, even though traditional quilters have been doing it for centuries.
It's so funny to me to think about how I feel like there's so many, you and I have talked about this before, that there's so many modern quilters who think that they like invented quilting. like you don't, just because you took a 2-inch half square triangle and made it just a half square triangle. So like the idea that, I mean, everything that we do now, I mean, truly, there's nothing new under the sun. Like, nobody is going to reinvent anything in such a way that we're like, I've never seen anything like that before. Oh my gosh. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I think I'm big on honoring the past. Um, I think that my quilting style, the things that I make, the things that I produce, so heavily lean toward more the old than the new. The fabric choices feel new and modern, but the style itself is pretty traditional, because not, I don't feel like a particularly modern person.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I like, I mean, I don't, instead of just pretending that I was inspired by the old, I just go for the old, like, because I'm not one of those people who's going to say, that nobody can use a half square triangle in that way because I used a half square triangle in that way. No, a zillion other people used a half square triangle in that way before you used a half square triangle in that way.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I don't think there's any point I mean, just have fun with it. I get really bogged down with like the whole like labeling stuff modern, labeling stuff traditional. It doesn't matter. Sew what you want to sew. Have fun with it. Who cares? Like, who cares?
I think it's a matter of branding and semantics.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's just like that's just the world we live in now.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to break everything down into little categories and little boxes, and you have to fit into this and that and the other thing. Whatever, just do whatever you want. Whatever, if it makes you happy, nobody's getting hurt. Who cares?
We're all sewing 3 layers together, and
Yep.
everything that we're doing, we're standing on the shoulders of all of the quilters that have come before us, and we're just kind of, making our own twist on what women, men have been sewing together for hundreds, some thousands of years.
Absolutely. Yep.
Which, how beautiful is that? That like what we're doing right now is tied to our ancestors from hundreds. Some quilts even date back to like 1,000, 2,000 years ago. How beautiful is that we're connected to them through this craft that we do with our hands?
Well, it's the best thing ever. I mean, we have to do everything that we can to keep it going. I mean, I think more than any other generation, our generation, like this craft could very easily just fall by the wayside with our generation. We have to like spread the word about it as much as and as often as we possibly can. I mean, it's because here's the thing, we're not like our ancestors made quilts because they needed to. They, like they needed things to keep warm, and they found opportunities to create beautiful things with it. But we don't have that problem. We can go to Target and get a quilt. So, I mean, more than ever, we need to talk about this craft and to respect the craft and spread the word about it, because otherwise, who's going to be doing this in 50 years, once we're gone? You got to constantly be teaching younger people about it. I think it's I know my school doesn't even have a home ec course anymore, that like simple 101 sewing class that I got to take in junior high, kids don't take that anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, just even on the most basic level of being able to sew a button on a shirt, it's just, we have to do more to get young people interested again in what this craft is all about, because it's fun as hell.
Yeah, it is. And I think that I feel like there's a resurgence of wanting to get back to craft in general, even more so than just quilting. But there's like just the handmade. I think the idea of just making something by hand and slowing down and just expressing yourself too creatively. I think people are going to be drawn to that again and again. I think despite how digital we get, we still want something tactile. And there's something so kind of visceral about a quilt, that it's this piece of art that you make with your hands. You can express yourself in it, but then you also can wrap up your family in it. There's something special about this craft that you just can't find elsewhere, right?
There's this thing that's like innate to us we, people like you or me or the people who subscribe to Meander or whatever, we're not we didn't just happen upon this. Like, we've been doing, like, this has been part of our, like, we're tactile people. Like, that's been built in us. Like, that's biological. Like, that's science, you know? I mean, my grandmother's a seamstress. My grandmother on my father's side was a knitter. I mean, like, fabric is in my DNA, you know, fiber, creating. My father is a restaurant owner and an entrepreneur, you know, like, that is all part of my history.
Yeah.
And, you know, just because you didn't sit there and have a conversation with your aunt who was a quilter doesn't mean that her that same blood is flowing through you. And, like, it's part of us. I mean, there are certain things, it doesn't matter how big your iPad is or how cool the new iPhone is. There are certain things that cannot replace the feeling of creating something for yourself with your own hands. And there are some people who will never understand that. I mean, I have family members who just don't get what I do at all.
Yeah.
But there are always, hopefully, I mean, I mean, heaven forbid this gets bred out of us. There are always going to be people who value creating and value the endless possibilities of the things that you can do. I mean, for me, it never gets old that I can make a quilt and it is mine. It is this one that exists in the world. Even if somebody reproduces a version of it, the fabric will never be placed in exactly the same way. The fabrics are never going to be exactly the same fabrics. That one quilt is mine and only mine, and that's it.
Yeah.
There's nothing that can replace that.
Yeah.
Especially not in this digital era. And so I think that, I mean, again, if that's something you value, then you value that to your grave. It doesn't go away, you know? I know that for me, I mean, I've always loved creating, and there's just nothing more satisfying. Even back when it was theater, you know, like, I've always been, like, being creative and being surrounded by creative people has always been something that I needed to be a happy and healthy person, you know? So it's just so important to, I mean, I can't imagine my life without this craft. And even though this industry has changed so much, just even since I have come into it, to think about where it's going to be in the next 20 years, you know, it's interesting because it's evolving quickly.
Yeah, for sure.
So, you know, it's very, very, I'm super, super interested to see what happens.
Yeah.
I think it's a really, really fascinating industry.
Oh yeah, I agree. From just a business perspective, just understanding how things are shifting is so interesting. But I mean, that's really beautiful how you're talking about it's just baked into you. I think this idea of, my husband talks about it. He studied the work of Carl Jung, the psychologist, a lot. And he talks about this idea of biological memory, that we have that's just kind of baked into our biology as humans, this just kind of memory of what it means to be a human. And I think part of that is making, part of that is creating, just this, because are there any other species on the planet that have this desire to just make and create and express themselves? I think that's just part of what makes us human, which is beautiful.
It's gorgeous. Yeah, there's nothing better than that.
So tell us about, I heard a rumor that a certain Giuseppe can be found on the subways of New York with fabric and needle in hand. Tell us all about that.
Yeah, so I basically from my grandmother, and I definitely get this really bad habit of never, ever, ever being able to sit still ever. So there's just any moment where I can be, I want to either be doing something, learning something with somebody. I used to say that I get bored really easily, but I don't. It's like that I feel guilty not working really easily. So it's a very different thing than getting bored really easily. I mean, I get bored like really easily, but I've come to find that really the reason I do it is because, especially now that my entire world is fabric. I mean, my 9 to 5 job is with Andover Fabrics.
Yeah.
And then I come home and I let's say I have two full-time jobs. 9 to 5, I work for Andover Fabrics, and from 6 to 2 a.m. I work for Giucy Giuce.
When do you sleep?
I don't know. People keep telling me about sleep, and I'm like, I don't know what it is.
You should try it. It's good. Good.
Yeah. If I can stop sewing, then I'll go to sleep. But excuse me. But yeah. So anyway, English paper piecing. I had all of this time on the subway that I was like, okay, I could read a book or I could knit. Those are all great, valuable things to do.
Because you were an actor, you were going to auditions and stuff like that all over the city, right?
Absolutely. You know, like, I mean, I'm like just constantly, I mean, like I don't even come home and just like, I can count on one hand in the past like 5 years the amount of times that I've come home and just turned on the TV and watched TV. It just doesn't happen. Like, I just don't do it. It's not part of any part of my process. Unless it's like a social kind of thing, that's different. Yeah. You know, if I'm like sitting on the couch with my boyfriend watching a movie, that's different than like me come home, sit down on the couch, relax. Nah.
If you're sitting, you're sewing, huh?
Exactly. Absolutely. Always. And so that all of that time I was thinking, like, I would be like on the subway and be like, I could very easily sit here and sew something or stand, you know, and sew something if I had something to do in my hands. And so English paper piecing was starting to get popular when I started commuting into the city regularly to go to Andover Fabrics to work. And so I just started English paper piecing on the subway. I had knit on like city buses for a really long time. So doing handwork on public transit didn't seem like that much of a leap.
Yeah.
But so then I just basically like devised a quick little system. I have like my little pouch that has all my tools. I have a Ziploc bag that has the block that I'm working on. You know, I pre-thread my needle, and I basically would because you'd be surprised how quickly like 25 minutes here, 30 minutes here on a train, how quickly that time adds up to be able to get something done. Like when I was working on my Moonstone blocks, promoting them, like by the time I got home, I had finished 2 blocks a day, and they're not like, you know, there's like a lot of pieces in each of those blocks, you know? So that meant that if I was doing that, since I was introducing English paper piecing into kind of like my business strategy into what I did, that meant that when I got home, I didn't have to do that. I could work on other projects. Yeah. So I've taken a break from it recently just because I've come to realize that I actually do need to limit the amount of time that I actually work a little bit. I need to it's probably not healthy to wake up in the morning, start working on something, go to work on something, and then come home and work on something. There probably should be a little bit of time in there to take a deep breath, you know? Yeah. So I'm currently not promoting any English paper piecing pattern in particular, so it's cool. But it was an intense couple of months there while I was working on my first EPP quilt while I was just trying to get it all done. But it is fun, and it's great to do in the car if you don't get car sick. You know, I'm fortunate that I don't get car sick. But on the plane, like I was traveling and teaching so much, you know, sitting in hotels and stuff like that. It's just such a great thing to have, like literally in your pocket to work on.
Yeah, and I'm sure you get lots of stares. And what are you doing over there?
I definitely. I mean, like, you know, people in this industry know me as like, you know, this like guy that you could probably walk up to and give a hug to, and you probably won't think twice about it. Mm-hmm. But appearance wise, if you actually saw me on the subway in the morning looking like this,
you're just a big dude.
I'm just a big dude, right? So it's a little bit weird, I think, for people to
see a big dude.
What is that guy? What is he doing? Yeah, like they can't even see the thread because the thread I use is so thin. Yeah. I was just a completely crazy person sitting there like with
because they can't see the thread, so they're just seeing you hold.
They just see me hold tiny pieces of paper
and moving your hand around as if you're casting a spell on your little hexagons.
Yeah, I mean, the good thing is that it's New York City, so like you can do whatever you want, nobody's gonna care. But I've run into many knitters on the train, been knitting and then seen somebody across from me knitting. I've yet to run into anybody else English paper piecing on the train. Yeah. So haven't had that happen yet. When that does happen, I will freak out, and that person will become my best friend in the world.
Totally.
I mean, yeah, but it hasn't happened yet, so we'll see. Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Okay, good. Let us know. Can you meet your kindred spirit?
Yes.
So, all right. How do you approach a new project? How do you what is your creative process kind of look like? Do you just look at your fabric and say, "Ooh, this could be cool together." Oh, I want it. Like, how do you approach how does your creative process look?
It is very, you and I have talked about this a lot. For me, creative process is it's very intuitive.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it's very personal to, I mean, anybody's creative process, I think, is personal. When I say personal, I don't like to talk about it. I just mean it's mine,
Yeah, yeah, unique to you.
It's unique to me, right? It really all depends. I mean, just like how, the previous in the video where we talked about the different ways to approach creating an English paper piecing pattern.
Yeah. Just to give you guys a back or what he's talking about, Giuseppe is joining us on Meander in our Meander Guild. That if you're interested in joining that, you can. I'll have a link probably below this where you can learn more about that and learn from Giuseppe. But he taught us all about English paper piecing, and it was amazing. And then he also talked to us about how you can kind of go about designing your own English paper piecing patterns. So, okay, go.
Yeah. So just like with that, like I have two different approaches where sometimes I approach it from putting shapes together and sometimes I approach it with having a shape and dissecting it. The creative process for me is very, like, it doesn't for me ever just start with, it always starts with the fabric, or it always starts with the pattern, or it always starts with whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It almost never starts with the same thing.
Okay.
For me, like, I mean, color is always a big part of it, but like, there's sometimes where I'll just be like, oh, I love that pattern. And so I'll work backwards from the pattern and figure out what fabric will best tell the story of that fabric. But there are other times that I'll have a fabric collection and be like, this is beautiful. How do I translate this into something new? Mm-hmm. And sometimes that means finding a pattern that goes with it. Sometimes it means designing my own pattern. Sometimes it means all sorts of different things. So I guess the best way to say it is that my creative process is very organic and depends very much on what I'm working on at the time.
Yeah.
Sometimes there is the clearest, like a picture is clear as day, and I know exactly what I want to do and need to do to get there. And sometimes it's a vague form of an idea, and I just keep building at it and building at it and building at it until it comes to me and I know this is it. This is what I've been working toward.
Yeah.
So I have like my first fabric collection for Andover Fabrics was I knew what I wanted it to look like from the beginning. Mm-hmm. There was no question about it. It was fully formed in my mind, and I just designed all of the pieces to get there. The collection that I'm working on right now is more, I have a theme that I want to play with, an idea that I have, and it's been about figuring out the different elements to bring that theme to life.
Mm.
And I've chipped away at it enough so that I am now I know. We went up to Maine for the holidays. My boyfriend and I, to go visit his family.
Yeah.
And as we were driving up, I was looking up at the sky, and I just like I was looking at the sky, and and it all, like, that last piece just came to me, and then all of the other little parts of everything else. I was just sitting there quietly looking at the sky, but I could see in front of me this and this and this and this, all of those little things, all separate ideas that I had for all of them, just all going chuk, 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 and they all just like, and I just thought, that's it.
Yeah.
That's what you've been working toward.
Yeah.
And that was it. And the idea, I haven't deviated from it. That's for me too, a big thing is that once I get the idea, once I know it, once I'm like, okay, that's it, I don't deviate from it very much.
Do you ever have doubts, or do you just say, like, you just stick with it? Not
really. Yeah. Once I know it, mm-hmm. once it goes from being up here to being down in my gut, that's when I'm like, okay, it's time to now just get to work to make it happen.
Yeah.
I'm very big. I mean, my whole life I've been big on like what my gut tells me.
Yes.
I think more people need to listen to their gut. I think that most everybody knows what the right choice is that they have to do,
Yes.
but next to nobody listens. Nobody trusts themselves to really do it.
Yes. This is
And
so true with life and with
creativity,
color, with creativity,
absolutely.
with everything. You know so much more than you think you do.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You have seen so much in your life. You have lived through a lot. You know more than you will ever give yourself credit for. Most people just will not give themselves the credit that they deserve.
Yes.
I'm really big on that. I'm really big on like you have to trust your instincts. You have instincts. Everybody has an instinct.
Mm-hmm.
You need to listen to it. You need to trust it. I feel like that's what, and I'm sure you'll agree with me when I'm teaching. I teach most of all is, what does your gut tell you?
Yes.
Does it feel, what do you think? Like they'll be like, well, how would you put this together? Well, it doesn't matter how I put it together because you're putting it together. What does your gut tell you to do?
Yep. Yeah. I say that over and over in my different workshops. They'll say, okay, what do you think? What do you think about this? Okay, well, what do you think about it?
Right.
And or a fabric choice, and that it's probably super annoying, but like and this is, I went to school, I studied education, and this is how we're taught to teach kids, especially with I took a class on how to teach art, and which is a really intuitive. It's hard to teach something that's intuitive, and so something that's so important is not to say. I think that is one of the things that drives me the most crazy about our industry is a lot of times people will say, this is how you make a quilt. This is the way you do this. This is the right way. This is the proper way to do this. You need this type of seam. You need, like, there's all of these rules where I don't think there's a wrong way to sew 3 layers together. I think it can be however you want. I don't think there's a wrong fabric palette to put together. I don't think there's a wrong color combination to put together. I think it's all a matter of your preference. And then again, going back to, so much more than you think you do. It's that I talk about Amanda a lot, that inner artist. It's your intuition, that inner artist, that inner voice. It's all the same thing. Yep. That has, like you just said, has seen so much, knows so much, recognizes color harmonies. When your gut or that intuition is saying something's kind of off, that's that inner wisdom knowing, like, oh, well, maybe I need to swap out some things or something like that. So I'll often, to my students, they'll say, okay, what do you think about these colors? Or what colors should I do? And I say, well, what do you think? And they go, oh, well, I don't know. And I say, okay, well, if you did know, what would it be? What would the answer be? If your wiser self did know, what would the answer be? Because most likely, and then inevitably after they go, well, I kind of like this and this together. I'm like, oh, that looks lovely. Go with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's I think self-doubt is can be so crippling in so many different ways.
Yeah.
But I think that it's so important to just like, I wouldn't be doing anything that I'm doing if I didn't just trust my instincts. And that's not just in this industry, just my whole, my instinct to go from working in the field of theater and acting to changing and deciding, oh no, I want to pursue this instead, because it felt like it was going to be more fulfilling for me in a lot of different ways. Creatively, I was going to have a lot more control. Financially, it felt like it was going to be more viable. All of these different things. I had to work through a lot of steps to get there, but once I knew it, I knew it, So that's an important thing though, is to be able to, and it's not an easy thing. It's so not easy to be able to confidently know you're making the right choice, or because with this new group, it feels really right, and I'm really excited about it. And
fabric collection.
Yeah, my new fabric collection. Yeah, it feels like I'm on the right path, and all I can do is stick to my guns. All I can do is take it, sew with it, make a whole bunch of stuff with it, show people exactly what I was thinking. And if I do that, then I've done my job.
Yes.
I did maybe it won't necessarily be what you would think to do with the fabric, not you, editorial you. But if I get, all of these things and I make 10 quilts out of it, nobody can say to me, you didn't know what you were doing. No, I did. I made 10 quilts out of it. I had an idea. You might not have liked the idea, but it was right. It's what I wanted,
Yeah.
So That's all you can really do.
Trust your gut, go with it,
Okay.
learn from
Yeah.
a bit of it.
There's so many things that I mean, my first fabric collection came out after 3 years of me working at Andover Fabrics. I had initial drafts of it before I started working there. My relationship with Andover started with me wanting to be a fabric designer for them. But then they ended up hiring me, and I was like, well, steady paycheck sounds great. So I started working for them, and all of that stuff that I learned. This fabric collection is still, it's that original line. It's just a much more sophisticated, thoughtful, learned version of that original collection because I've worked in the industry at a really deep, meaningful level for the past 3 years.
Yeah.
So it was impossible for all of that, all of those things that I've learned to not enter into this first group. But there are still things that I learned even after it was produced, like stuff like I discovered something like 2 days ago cutting into the fabric. I've made literally 7 or 8 quilts now with this fabric. I discovered something and I thought, oh, next time I can improve upon that by doing this, you know?
Yeah.
So, and conversely, you know, it works in both ways because then you can also be like, oh, I didn't realize that that works that way. Will cut up. But then I saw it in all sorts of different ways cut up, and I thought, wow, this is even cooler than I imagined it would be. So that means that something like this has to be in my future collections. Like
Yeah.
this has got to be a constant because it works. It's working really well for me.
Yeah.
So that was something that I hadn't realized before. So it works both ways. You know, you learn good lessons and you learn bad lessons, but you're only going to learn the lessons if you really commit to what you're doing and you don't doubt yourself.
Yes.
And you don't feel bad about yourself and judge yourself when you are when you're learning those things, like, because there's no point, like, you know, yeah, like whatever, there's something that I didn't like about the original printing of something. Who cares? It's printed, it's been shipped out to stores across the world. Like there's no going back now. You did it, it's done, learn from it, move on, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So
It's all, I mean, this is something I say also in Meander and over, that the end result doesn't really matter. It's just all about
that's the journey.
journey. It's all about the process. It's what you're learning from. The end result doesn't matter. The end result kind of has nothing to do with you, and it, you know, what other people think about your quilt or what you've made doesn't really matter. If you enjoyed making it and you were able to, you know, express yourself a little bit in that, that's the point, right?
You know what? Like, how many people don't even have the gumption to put something out there for other people to interpret into their own thing? You
Yeah,
know?
to make something at all.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Even I'm not even talking about. Well, yeah, exactly. I'm talking about just like to make something in general.
Yeah.
I mean, like I've met so many people who know nothing about quilting who feel like they can break apart my work and tell me, you know, well, this doesn't like blah 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 blah. Well, you know what? When you want to sit down at a machine and you want to do something yourself, then we can have a conversation. But until then, I don't care what you think. Your opinion doesn't mean anything to me because you don't know anything about what this is. You know. It's just, I mean, like, just being able to, I've met so many people who hem and haw, like, oh, I would love to be a quilter. It would be so great. All you have to do is get some fabric and get a sewing machine. And suddenly you're a quilter. That's it. Doesn't matter how good you are. It doesn't matter how bad you are. But the thing that does separate you is whether or not you actually do it, whether or not you try.
Yeah.
That's what matters.
Yeah. It takes a bit of audacity to be a maker, especially if you're not just going to because that's where I think a lot of quilters will start, and then they will buy a kit and they'll buy a pattern, and that's a great place to start. But a lot of quilters will be too terrified to branch out. They'll be too terrified to pull together their own palette. They'll be too terrified to start to kind of make their own patterns. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with that, but I think it takes a little bit of audacity to kind of step out of that and to try to pull together your own fabric palette, to try to play around with maybe modifying an existing pattern to kind of make it your own, because it might not work.
Absolutely.
You have to be okay with that.
I was getting some projects ready this afternoon. I was looking at some stuff, and I pulled up this pillow that I made a while ago. And I said to Steve, my boyfriend, I said to him, you know, some projects I work forever on. And usually when I work a long time on something, I end up being really, really happy with it. And even if I'm not happy when I'm working with it, I think to myself, oh, you know, but at the end, I'll like it. You know, like I'll be happy that I put the work into it. And this one project that I took longer than I'd care to admit working on, I still absolutely hate it. I wasted my time on it. But I learned a lesson that I should never do something like that again.
So then
Like,
it's not wasted.
it wasn't wasted, exactly, right. Because the thing is that, I didn't like it that much, so you know what? I just didn't put it on Instagram, and nobody saw it, nobody knows it exists.
Yeah.
The only thing that, I wasted was my time, but even that wasn't a waste because now I know I tried it, I hate it, it doesn't work for me, move on,
That's the only way, though, that you're going to get anything good is if you're willing to make mistakes. This is true with life, with any kind of art, with quilting. If you're not willing to make mistakes and make something that might look like a hot mess, if you're not willing to just try, then it's, you're never going to get to that point where you're making things that are really original and expressive of who you are. And so if that's something that you have a desire, if you just want to make beautiful quilts and that's all the desire that you have is just to make pretty quilts and aren't as interested in the creative journey and the creative process, then that's a different matter. But I think if you're wanting to kind of explore your own creativity and your own creative potential and grow artistically, then I think you have to be willing to make mistakes.
Yes, absolutely. And the most important part is to not, you make the mistakes, don't judge yourself for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, learn from it and move on.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. All right. This is so good. I could sit here and talk to you like all day long.
Well, I feel like I actually a while ago forgot that we were recording something for people to talk about, and I was just sitting here talking to you. Yeah. Which I think is not like a bad thing necessarily.
Totally. Yeah, she is. My husband was asking where the cat is. The cat's been locked in that room because I just
when we walked away before I was like, there's something behind that door. I don't know what it is, but there's something behind that door. It's a cat though, so
it's a cat. Don't worry.
It should be said that I assumed it was a cat or a dog. I didn't think there was like a person trying to claw and get out.
Trying to claw out of my closet. There's actually a lot more to me that you don't know.
I watch a lot of horror films, so my mind pretty much goes wild.
Oh, my dear Giuseppe. Okay, so we already know now that you are teaching a meander this month. So if we want to learn more, dissect, pull more out of that creative brain of yours and learn more, we can learn in meander. We'll have links below. Where else can we find out more about you? And you're a national teacher, so you travel all over the place to teach. So if we want to have you come teach at, if any of our listeners are from a local guild that they want you to come teach at, how do we book you? How do we find you? What are you teaching?
Yeah.
What projects you have kind of in the pipeline?
Yeah, sure. I teach a lot of different things. The best way to get in touch with me is through my Instagram account. Okay. That's Giucy Giuce on Instagram. It's GIUCY_GIUCE. Okay. From there, there's like a little, you can email me right from there. Okay. I'm sending out my 2019 now, so if you'd like to talk, I would love to talk to you about that.
Perfect. And I'll include below here contact info for how they can get in touch if they want you to come teach. Excellent. So what kind of stuff do you teach?
I teach English paper piecing.
Yeah.
I teach tiny piecing. I'm trying to see if there's anything around here that I can show for my tiny piecing.
Well, we included some photos at the beginning, and I'll have some photos above and below that people can see.
Excellent. Perfect. So I teach that. I teach some of my different patterns, like my North quilt or my new quilt called Particle. That's a new class that I have recently introduced into the roster.
Awesome. And that's all paper piecing, right?
North is foundation paper piecing. Particle is not. Okay. Particle is kind of a patchwork 101 sort of thing where it teaches a lot. Basically, that whole class is about working economically as you possibly can. Okay. So it's about kind of economics and sewing to make your piecing and your cutting as efficient as you possibly can.
Cool.
So that's what that new class is about. I also teach a really fun class that I really, really enjoy on quilt photography and social media and branding.
Cool.
That is one of my very favorite classes to teach. That one's really fun. We start by going through different photo techniques, and then we talk about branding and things like that, and then we go out into the wild and actually shoot photography. Do like photos of students' projects and stuff like that in the wild, and apply everything that we learned in the first half of the class. That's a really fun class. I love that one.
Oh, I bet. And I bet you're amazing teaching that.
Thanks. I really like that one. That one, I mean, like as much as I love quilting. I love sewing. I love teaching, but I really also I'm very much, I love marketing. I think it's a very interesting subject, and I love discussing that with people. So,
yeah. So anybody who's interested in building a brand in the quilt industry, or interested in marketing their local guild more, things like that, that would be a cool thing to check out.
Absolutely, that'd be fun. Yeah.
Well, what else do you have in the pipelines that we can look forward to seeing? Because we know that your current collection, you have one collection that's currently out and one that's almost out, right?
Yes, I have one. Quantum came out in November, and Redux, which is kind of a sequel to Quantum, will be shipping in March.
Cool.
And then my current collection that I'm drawing now will be released will be out, for people to see. Hopefully, I'm thinking like end March, around there, and that'll ship in the fall. Okay. And then, so that's what I'm working on as far as fabric goes. For patterns, I'm working on releasing my particle quilt that I was mentioning before, as well as hopefully working on some new tiny piecing patterns, which I'm very excited about. And then I'm excited to be expanding my teaching more. I'm hoping that maybe I'll get to go to Canada this year, and I'm hoping that maybe in the next couple years I'll hopefully be able to arrange something for the UK. So
wonderful. Take me with you. I went to Canada earlier this year. It was amazing.
I'd very much like to go do like a little tour up there or something like that.
Yeah,
that'd be very cool.
So much fun. All right, Giuseppe. Well, thank you so much for being so generous with your time. And I know that I'm sure everybody enjoyed and was just as inspired and excited by this juicy conversation, no pun intended, that we just have. And I could sit here and talk to you all day long about creativity.
Yeah, I feel like we always end up talking about that whenever we talk to one another. And it's always one of those conversations. Time always escapes us when we start talking about stuff like that, because I think that's what I love talking to you about this, is because we both have the same kinds of points of view, but we approach things in very different ways. And I think I just love talking to you about this kind of stuff. Again, even now, being reminded that we're talking and people are going to be seeing this, I still feel like I'm just sitting here talking to you. So.
Yeah. No, that's recording.
Hopefully I didn't say anything too bad.
I don't think so.
No, other than the person in your closet, I think we're safe.
Oh, my friends. Well, thank you so much again for being here. And I can't wait to see all of the new things that you have coming out. And I know that everybody's going to, in the end, is just going to have a ball diving into paper piecing, English paper piecing, and making it their own.
Absolutely. I'm very excited. Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Pleasure. You have a beautiful day.
You too.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.